All right, so the last spell just had an absolutely massive update that dropped this morning. I streamed 8 hours of it, then I read the patch notes, and now we're going to talk about all the details of the 0.99.0.13 beta, also known as the Omens and Meta rework. So this is a rather massive update. It includes this whole list of things that I will go over in detail, but it has a progression wipe, new mechanic, Omens, a new medic progression system, temple and mana reworks, new mechanics for corpses, a Seer rework, night saves, quality of life updates, sound design reworks, and balancing changes. It's absolutely huge, and as a spoiler, it feels amazing. This would be a fantastic time to start playing or getting into the last spell because it feels like a whole new game. And the progression system in particular has gone from feeling really onerous and frustrating to feeling rewarding and fun, actually. But before we get into all that, we have to talk about the progression wipe. So for a lot of people like me, we've played a lot of the last spell, and we have stockpiled a massive mountain of the resource that is used for progression, which is called Tainted Essence. And all of that is going away. There are two progression systems. There is a achievement-based progression system, which is like kill 15 enemies with punches, and then there is a spend your meta currency, aka Tainted Essence system, that is also for unlocking things like variants of weapons, additional hit points, additional action points, etc. All of that is resetting to 0. Everyone will start out in the tutorial with nothing. I've heard a lot of people talk about the fact that they are frustrated with this. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but the short version of it is I think people should be happy because the purpose of early access, the reason we are all playing this game before it is released to the public, is because the developers are trying to try things and see what works, see what doesn't work, and refine systems to make them feel better. And that is exactly what they're doing here. They had a system that didn't feel good, where you just ground endlessly and got kind of piddling rewards, and are transforming it into something that is a system that feels rewarding and interesting. So we should all be incredibly happy that Ishtar Games has decided to do this, and I think they've done a beautiful job of it. And so a progression wipe is to be expected, because this is going to allow them to gather data and learn more about people's experiences progressing through the game. They'll be able to collect data and see what's working well, what's working poorly, and make further refinements to the system. Okay, now on to the meat and potatoes of the patch. The first and most important system I think that they're adding is the Omens system. They say omens can be selected at the start of each run. Each omen gives a specific bonus when selected, ranging from simple attribute bonuses to more unique effects. Omens are meant to replace the strong permanent upgrades that players used to get, coupled with brand new effects. This allows us to have better control over the intended power level and difficulty for each map, while also introducing strategic choices at the beginning of each run. So what does this look like? There is an Omens screen that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows of Omens. I think there are 70 something in total. And each Omen is going to have some type of effect. The 3 that they shared with us in the patch notes is a Omen that will give all of your heroes 8% crit, an Omen that will give all of your characters patience, and an Omen that will make traps more effective, and in fact make traps have a 33% chance of not using up a charge when they are tricked. This is really interesting. They say that, to be clear, omens are not meant to erase all permanent upgrades. They still exist, and we even added new ones, but omens are a way for us to introduce more upgrades, more interesting effects, while keeping the balance in the game interesting. So a few things that you should recognize from these screenshots before we move on. So first of all, you'll notice on the left, we have Omens, and then we have Gildenberg 0 of 3. So you're going to be selecting up to 3 Omens, or potentially less, that will be active for your Gildenberg run. The 4 that you see at the bottom there are one that boosts Tainted Essence, one that boosts health, one that boosts mana, and one that boosts movement. For my Gildenberg run, which I won rather handily, I picked Tainted Essence, health, and movement. Excuse me. Tainted Essence, mana, and movement, because I think generally health is only useful if you're getting hit, and if you're getting hit, you're probably doing something wrong 60% of the time. But anyways, the other thing that's really important is to notice that there is a number of highlighted stars on each of them. So Omen of Restraint has 2 stars, 2 yellow stars. Omen of Violence and Omen of Trap Efficiency each have 1. This is the number of slots that they take up. So for Gildenberg, you could use Omen of Violence and Omen of Restraint, but that would fill up all 3 of your slots. So then they talk about starting a run with omens. We've already covered some of this, but each time you start a run, you're going to select a set of omens, and they will take up to 3 slots depending on their strength. And the harder the map is, the more omens you'll be able to use. One thing that I don't know yet is if additional apocalypse levels are also going to increase the number of omens that you can have active. I suspect the answer is no, and I think Elderlicht has 9 omens available, and Gildenberg has 3, and then Lakeburg is 5, which would lead me to believe that Glenwald is going to be 7. This means that the hardest map also allows for the most interesting starting strategies and combos. You'll focus your omen choices on making your heroes stronger, boosting your defenses, setting up your economy, or maybe a balance between all 3. And it shows a set of omens active, 9 for the final map and 3 for the earlier maps. And like I said, I think it goes 5 and 7 for the middle 2. Unlocking omens. After completing the tutorial, players will only be able to choose between a few starting omens with simple effects. However, additional omens can be unlocked in the Orichalcum. Currently, there are around 70 omens to unlock. It seems like they cost about 700 Tainted Essence each. Some of the lower ones may only be about 500. I've basically been skipping all of the omens and just unlocking the power elements, but we'll have to wait and see. At some point in the future, I will do a tier list of all of the omens so that we can review them and talk about which ones are situationally useful, never useful, always useful, that sort of stuff. Then they talk about Boundless mode, which is a great, cool little addition that I'm really happy that they included. With Boundless mode, we also took the opportunity to merge the old Easy mode into the Omen system. Now renamed to Boundless mode, because let's be honest, the game never goes easy on you. It can be activated in the Omen selection screen. Activating Boundless mode allows you to exceed the slot limit on Omens by however much you want, but also unlocks Boundless mode specific Omens, which have the same effect as the Easy mode modifiers. Use this new Boundless mode to play the game at your own pace or test some overpowered combos. I think this is super smart and super cool. Basically, it allows you to mix and match and do all types of things. There are certain omens that are like more hand crossbows. So if you wanted to go absolutely nuts with hand crossbows for a particular run, or go heavily defender with all longbows, there's a ton of options. You could do like watchtowers, ballistas, catapults, and leave everyone inside. There's a bunch of fun, interesting options, and I'm really excited to see some of the things that people do with Boundless modes. Very clever replacement for Easy mode, which I would have never played on, and also Boundless mode just sounds like something that I wouldn't be embarrassed to play. So then they show us an example of someone playing with 16 points worth of omens activated. And then they also show some of those. I believe all of the ones with halos over them, all of the omens with halos, are the ones that are part of like the Easy mode modifiers, but hard to say. So next big thing we need to talk about is the meta progression rework. So the Orichalcum, that is the evil purple goddess person. All Orichalcum unlocks have been redesigned. Some have been removed, some have been added, and pretty much all existing ones have had their unlock conditions and prices changed. This is one of the main reasons why we had to wipe saves, and the goal is to make the meta progression smoother than before. I can say, having played for about 8.5 hours, it feels very smooth. I didn't feel like it was particularly painful or long to get to the things that I wanted. I think only in Gildenberg when I had all of my, is it Gildenberg? Yeah. The second map, sorry, it's late here. But I was in the second map when I think I had all the weapons unlocked, or it was early in my Lakeburg run. More on the Orichalcum. A lot of important unlocks now come earlier than before, as I was just mentioning, like the in-building or some weapon unlocks. We also added new conditions in the Freud side of the Orichalcum in order to make challenges a bit more varied. So, very, very interesting, but basically, like, things are coming at you fast and furious. The early game, your first couple of runs, if you're winning, you're seeing a lot of progress, and it feels really rewarding. Then they also show off the fact that the inn is unlocked in Gildenberg. I was right about that one. And that is very early. So that means when you go into Lakeburg, you have that. You don't get the Seer until night 5 of Lakeburg, but things are coming at you at a pretty reasonable pace. Trophies. End of night trophies have been rebalanced, and some of the new ones have been added. The most important is You Won the Night trophy that gives you a hefty chunk of essence if you manage to beat a night. Feels good, means that you have a little bit more essence coming in on the regular just for succeeding at winning nights. And on the flip side, apparently this is a feature that a lot of people have been asking for, but you will now still get essence for nights that you lost. I think they've done something smart here, which is that the rewards for losing a night are significantly lower. So even if you barely scrape by on a night, now there is a nice big advantage and a nice big bonus that comes from winning the night. And even if you don't, you're not going to be completely shut out. So they show the victory and defeat screens. It looks like surviving Lakeburg is a 3,000 Tainted Essence pop, which is pretty solid. That's most of the way to one of the bigger, more impressive later on unlocks. And then even on a loss, you're still getting like 900 Tainted Essence, which feels pretty good. Now, Apocalypse multipliers, apparently you will earn more Tainted Essence by playing on higher Apocalypse levels. They don't give you percentages here. The screenshot that they provided in the blog post didn't have it. And for reasons that I will discuss a bit later on, I have not yet checked to see what those multipliers look like. So it's good that there's a bonus. I do suspect that by the time you kind of play through the game and go all the way to Elderlicht, you're going to have a lot of things already unlocked. And it seems like the Tainted Essence comes pretty quick. So I'm not sure that Apocalypse modes are going to be critical for grinding out a whole bunch of Tainted Essence. Now, we move on to the next big and super fascinating change that I'm over the moon about. Temple and Mana Wells have been redesigned. They say, while the Temple and Mana Well had its uses until now, we weren't satisfied with their dynamic. Building one often felt like a punishment more than an investment compared to other buildings. Now, this is doubly true because if you watched any of my plays, especially on the higher difficulties, I would avoid Temple and Mana Wells like the plague. You can almost always get by with a couple health potions and a couple mana potions to fill the gaps, and only if things go really terribly wrong were you building these structures. And when you did, you were spending money that you could have been spending elsewhere, so it was particularly painful to do that. Now, the temple looks a lot different. So the temple is more expensive at 70 gold to build, but it has a passive effect that is every one of your heroes gains 8 max health every night, or every production phase, basically. This is already super cool. It means that picking up heroes earlier, they're going to have some passive scaling from the temple. They'll be getting a little more HP. Over the course of a run, this will probably offset a glass cannon pickup on an early hero. It'll be really nice. In addition to that, the way that their activatable abilities are laid out have also changed. So Offering is a 40 health for 0 workers, which is really nice. So once a turn, you get 1 40-point heal. And then for 1 worker, you get 40 health to all heroes. That's really nice. Basically just an AoE heal. And then third, and this is the one that I think is really transformative, is Blessing. Costs 50 gold to unlock. It costs 2 workers to activate, but it permanently grants 24 max health to 1 hero. This is really cool because I think in the long term, that means you could build, say, a bodybuilder and get pretty incredible HP scaling if you're selecting HP and going for HP from the temple. You can also definitely offset those glass cannons. Mana Well got about the same treatment. The gold cost, though, went down, so I'm very tempted on the first night to build a Mana Well because you can have up to 2 of them. They cost 35 each, and every production phase, they're increasing max mana by 1, which is not insignificant, but it's, also not huge. But in addition to that, Benediction is restoring 6 mana to 1 hero for free, so you can get 2 of those each production phase. And then in addition to that, Mana Restore is doing 10 to all heroes. So a really nice, very cheap one worker way to top everybody's mana up if you missed by a little bit. I found myself using it quite a bit. There's currently a bug that if you upgrade it, the upgraded form, which I think is 15 mana to all heroes, doesn't actually restore to all heroes. I'm sure that will be fixed in the near term though. And then last but not least, Blessing is the same treatment that we had on the other one, which is +5 max mana to one hero. I think this one is a lot less alluring than the HP one, but still kind of interesting that you can get 5 max mana for 2 workers. I think this needs to be raised. If it was 10 max mana, I think for 2 workers, it would probably be right on. I'm not going to use this one much, but it's nice to see that it's there. Corpses. I had a flashback to Darkest Dungeon 2 when they added corpses, and I was like, oh no, this is going to be terrible. But no, corpses are basically loot pinatas. So corpses may appear at the end of each night and can be scavenged during the day, just like ruins. Piles of corpses appear in multiple sizes. The bigger pile, the greater the reward. So when we're talking about corpses, how do you make them appear? Corpses and their bigger variants have higher chances of appearing when enemies are killed close to the haven, and many enemies are killed at the same time. This means that some of the most dire situations may now lead to greater rewards. So this is interesting. We'll talk more about it, but when scavenging corpses can be scavenged with 2 different focuses. One gives gold, materials, and tainted essence, while the other gives items and more tainted essence. These scavenge actions have a fixed cost of 1 worker. This makes the bigger variants very interesting economy-wise. However, corpses can also act as obstacles, so you may even decide to let them be and use them as defenses, although they will rot away with time. However, if they are a hindrance to your strategy, you can choose to destroy them during the day. I made that mistake. I didn't realize they could be destroyed during my run, but the more important thing is it appears, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 sizes. I've only seen 2 sizes of corpses. There's the small ones that can be gotten. You can get basically either gold from them, you get some gold, some materials, and some tainted essence, or the bigger ones that give you an item. And the item rewards that I got were no slouch. It's a standard 3 to choose from type of thing. So this is a picture of a resource focused one. You're getting 20 gold, 38 materials, and 25 essence. I'm not sure what this was. I didn't see one this big. This might have been one of the larger ones. Generally, you know that they're the larger ones because they have 2 harvest options. So I think this is a larger one. Or if you don't do that, you get something like, I think, 55 essence and an item from the other option. Moving on though, now we have the Seer rework, and I think these changes to the Seer are pretty brilliant. So what they say about it is, up until now, we only gave very limited information on incoming waves, which made it difficult for us to design interesting nights, especially early on when players haven't placed the Seer building yet, to let players make more strategic decisions and make the overall enemy wave design more interesting. We decided to rework the Seer a bit, and they made 2 major changes. The first is banners. Prior to this change, you could use the guess where skill of the Seer to know proportionally where incoming waves were coming from. Now this information will always be given. So from wave number 1, you're going to have big banners, little banners, etc. Additionally, the banners now indicate a very vague quantity of enemies instead of just a proportion. A single side with a 4-skull banner will have more enemies than a single side with a 2-skull banner. So we're going to get a little more information about how many enemies we're going to necessarily be dealing with. This is what banners look like. You should be familiar with this if you played the game before. This is a 2-skull banner. What's very interesting, and I think this was a stroke of genius on this part, is precise arrows. Since its previous effect is now always given, aka the banners are always going to be seen, the guess where skill of the Seer is getting a new effect. When using the guess where skill, you will be able to see very precise breakdowns of where the enemies will come from and in what proportions, thanks to arrows of varying size. So this is what this looks like. This is Elderlicht, and you can see that there is a big arrow, big-ish arrow in the middle, a big-ish arrow on the left, and then 2 small arrows in the upper right and to the right of that. So that gives you a really nice idea of where mobs are going to be coming from. I think this is super smart. I will say that having it gated behind a Seer ability, I think, is a mistake. one of the things that I know, I don't personally do it when I play, but I know that a lot of people in the past will start up a night, see where things are coming from, then exit out, go back to deployment, and then play through knowing where enemies are coming from, because it's really frustrating to have the waves show up and you waste your first turn running over to them. So I think this probably should just be in the default game, but it's going to be really useful, really interesting, and really helpful to be able to do this. I found myself spending a worker on Lakeburg pretty regularly so that I could see where these are and line my folks up. It's also, the diagonals in particular are insanely beneficial, because it means that you can really say, okay, if I put someone on this corner, they can do kind of double duty on both directions. There's a ton of information to be gained. Very, very helpful. Now, onto the quality of life changes, and there are quite a few of them. The first thing is night saves. So you asked for it, and here it is. Now you can quit a night without fear of restarting it from the beginning. Your progress will be saved, and you will be able to resume from where you quit. This may prevent the save scumming-ish thing that I was describing before. We'll have to wait and see. We've been wanting to implement this for quite some time. As we know that nights can become quite long, we hope that players with less time on their hands will be able to enjoy this feature. I think this is a great thing. Quality of life, huge thumbs up. This screenshot is only noteworthy because it shows a harpy in the background, and yet it says your progress will be saved, whereas historically that was red text and said will not be saved. Victory and defeat panels. Now when you finish a night, the first thing that appears on the panel is the animation of the number of souls you gained with all of your trophies acquired during the night. You can also skip the animation and present your heroes on the panel and go to the profile to click on each heroes. I didn't actually notice this change. I'm going to have to play with it a bit more to see, but either way, end of night seemed fine. Item categories. Some categories were implemented in the game to classify protections so you can search and make some differentiations between heavy armors and light ones. This reminds me of a change that was just made in Darkest Dungeon 2, and I would love to see them create some type of like innate bonuses, like maybe all heavy body armors have 3 block, and then they could do something like set bonuses, where if you're wearing a heavy helmet, heavy pants, and a heavy chest piece, you get some type of additional benefit for having a full set of heavy items. I know it would add a lot more complexity to the game, but I think it would be super cool and super interesting to implement. Either way, this is interesting. I don't think it changes much. I don't understand how you filter off of it yet. I'll have to find that later on. Enemy life gauges. We changed the way that big enemy health bars are displayed. You should now be able to clearly see how much health remains on a boss or an elite. I'm going to give this like a B+. I still had a hard time sometimes seeing how much health, but it's not the situation where the health bars get so big that they start to look small again thing. So it is definitely an improvement. I think there's more work still to be done here. Sound design rework. The sound design seems great. They added a lot of sound effects, a lot of things that previously had no auditory feedback now do. Very nice. Also, the introduction, which I played through before the tutorial, was really nice. I recommend going and watching it again if you haven't. The story is coming together really nicely, and I'm super impressed. It had been a long time since I'd watched that cinematic. Balancing changes. These are substantial. The game has been rebalanced pretty substantially. They are substantial. Yeah. Anyways, big changes. It's late at night. So first, shared production building limit. The production buildings now share a building limit of 5, meaning you can build a maximum of 5 production buildings, but whichever ones you want. For example, you can have 3 bowers and 2 trinket makers in your haven. I love this. I think I'm often going to go for 3 armor smiths, but we'll have to see how that changes once we get the tinkerer and the alchemist. I'm a little worried that in some cases this means that you're going to have, I think, slightly less, because I think you used to be able to make 7 production buildings. You used to be able to have 1 alchemist, 1 tinkerer, 1 of each of the weapons, that's 5, and then 2 armorers. So this is a bit of a nerf because now you can't have the full 7 production buildings. But nonetheless, I think this is really cool for customization and building runs more tailored to what you're trying to accomplish. The Elderlicht Soul Vessels. The Soul Vessels in Elderlicht will now become ignited after 2 turns. On the first turn, they will warn the player that something is coming, and on the second turn, the Soulbound will spawn. This is so good because it was so frustrating watching them immediately pop in. I had a few times where one of these baddies would pop in and then immediately the ghost would block my ability to get there in order to extinguish it because it was standing in the way. This is much better. The only question that I have is, can you extinguish them while they are in this indicator phase, or do you need to wait until they actually pop before you can snuff them out? I would assume the latter, but either way, being able to relocate, have a turn to kind of like get there and get prepped to extinguish them is fantastic. Traits. All traits have been reworked and rebalanced to be more focused. On average, they will affect less different attributes, but give stronger bonuses. I'm not sure I understand this one completely, but what I will say from the limited time that I played is the effects of traits seem to be much larger percentages. Like I had one character who ironically had plus 12 crit from one stat and minus 12 crit from another one. So it was a net 0, but 12 crit is pretty substantial. More generally speaking, my thoughts on traits is they should be big and impactful enough that they affect the way that a character plays from beginning to end. In the past, traits have been relatively minor, and you'd be like, oh, I have -4 accuracy from a trait, so I need to pick up accuracy a little early because I'm a little short on it. But by the time you hit night 4, you're not really thinking about those traits. I think it's really smart if traits become bigger with stronger bonuses so that they inform the identity of that character throughout the entire run. Wounds. Some time ago, we modified the wound system to make wounds unique for each enemy because we wanted to allow for more tactical possibilities around this mechanic. However, they became too unique, making them bothersome to play around. Wounds are now more harmonized. Notably, enemies will lose movement points when wounded, but in proportion to their total move points. So this is the best example that I can give of this is the Accursed. They couldn't do their AP stealing attack if they were 2 blood drops wounded, which was really helpful to know, but everybody had slightly different ones and it was hard to keep them all in your head, etc. I think it's smart that they're going back to basics on this. This was a level of complexity that the game didn't need. But there's a piece of this that comes along with it, and it's shown best by this before and after. So you can see in the before and after, each one now seems to be losing some damage or some movement points or some dodge, but it's pretty standard things. On the right-hand side, they applied the same logic to heroes, and now the decreases are proportional. So if you have a really high movement point character, they are going to lose a lot of movement as opposed to just losing a little bit. This makes wounding, I think, a little more dangerous rather than a little less dangerous because you have the potential of losing a substantial amount of your stats, like losing a third of your action points. If you're capped at 12 action points is 4 action points. And if you're losing a third of your movement points and you're capped at 17 movement, that's a lot of movement that's evaporating. So I think this is something to be very cognizant of and careful of, but I think wounds are now more dangerous. Enemy attributes. The defensive attributes of all enemies have been rebalanced to make them more focused. As an example, compared to before, less enemies will gain block or dodge over the course of a run, but enemies that gain some will gain more noticeable amounts. This is very noticeable, and I'll come back to it in a second. They go on, we also wanted to reinforce the difference in strength between the different tiers of enemies. Common enemies will globally stay as weak as before, but stronger enemies will become even stronger, meaning they can be more impactful without the need of spawning them in quantities as high as before. So this is incredibly meaningful as a change to the game, and I'll talk a bit more about my particular experience, but these screenshots I think sum it up particularly well. You have the old Lancer that had some dodge, some resistance, a little bit of block, and now the Lancer is just a armor machine, sitting at 770 armor as opposed to 270 before. This is really cool because for the Lancer in particular, it means poison is much, much more effective, or armor penetration is much more effective. And I think it is really interesting, but this goes for all of them. I was running into bulkies that had 80 block. I was running into hoppers that had quite a substantial amount of hit points. It's really interesting. And that second part, the reinforcing the power of larger enemies, is really, really huge here. I can't stress enough how much meaner the scary enemies in waves are now than they were before. I think Twisteds are going to be absolutely terrifying. But what this boils down to for me more than anything is that in any particular part of your ring of defense, you need to have snare on the bar. The way that especially early on, I think probably later on we'll have the power to kind of chew through these baddies much more effectively, but on my first Lakeburg playthrough after the reset, I was running into bulkies that it took me like 5 turns to burn through the 1,000 hit points and 80 block that they had. So the way that I handled it was I had someone with a hand crossbow, or I had someone with a druid staff, and I just rooted them. I rooted them until all the other mobs were dead, and I just had 10 bulkies left on the map, and then I killed them. I expect that this strategy is going to be pretty dominant. And the way that Ishtar will eventually handle it is by making minimum movement points. So you cannot fully root something in place. But we'll have to wait and see. For now, that is a very viable strategy for dealing with these very strong, very resilient, large enemies. Enemy waves. Since the power level of the player has greatly changed with this update, enemy quantities in all cities have been rebalanced. They don't say if it's up or down. I think it is down for the rare enemies and perhaps up a little for the common enemies to make the waves still feel kind of full and fleshed out. On balance, it comes out to the same thing. The one thing that I would say is that because the weaker enemies are not scaling up as much, it does make propagation a little bit weaker because your bees won't ping pong 3 times back and forth between a bulky and an armored guy. It'll ping pong once and then it'll be done. So that's the patch notes. I know it's a lot. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. To all of this. I'm super curious what everyone else's thoughts are. Overall, I loved the 8 hours that I played today. I think that this is a huge step in the right direction for the last spell. And to be perfectly honest, with the way that I'm experiencing it now, I'm thinking that I may from time to time want to do these meta resets on my own, just because it's a different type of challenge. And it's actually a really fun challenge, and it's really enjoyable unlocking all of these things and going through that process, because it's no longer the sort of onerous, grindy, oh no, it's going to take me, 3 more nights or 2 more runs of Lakeburg to get 2-handed hammers or something like that. So if this video was helpful and you liked it, please toss me a like, a subscription if you want to see more like it. I will probably be doing an Omens tier list in the not too distant future. I will probably also be doing a few guides on how to get started and how to get your progression underway. I think one of the keys, if this would be useful for you, let me know, that I will be sharing at some point in the future is a guide where I talk about my first 2 nights on each of the maps. What am I building? How am I getting my economy started? Things like that. But for now, this is the patch notes. Hope it was helpful. Thanks very much. I'm going to crash out because it's late here. Have a good one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.